And wanted to welcome back. And before I get into the how the Vidians connect to the larger theory of what was really going on in the first two seasons of Star Trek Voyager, I wanted to go back to the Kazon one quick moment for something I think is one of the greatest misconceptions about them, or one of the biggest insults that people levy against them. But if the show had actually just stayed faithful to the content and had greater cultural competency in understanding this part of American and African American history, then the Kazon could have truly been what they were intended to be, which is a metaphor for gang culture, and rather than what they became, which is an allegory for racist stereotypes about gang culture. So I talked before in the previous video how the Kazon could be great, and the other one how the Trabe could have been great. About the Kazon being a race that was brutally oppressed and taken over by the Trabe. The Trabe used and exploited their labor and used the system of sects among the Kazon to keep them divided and pit them against each other, just to ensure their continued domination. The Kazon, uh, about 30 years ago, I believe, from the time of season one of Voyager, under the leadership of Jal Sankur, uh, overthrew the Trabe and forced them off the homeworld and set the way for the Kazon to be a spacefaring civilization. Because of the years of division that had been sowed among the Trabe, the sects could not remain united, and eventually the sects began to war against themselves. We do not know the fate of Jal Sankur, and I think it's also interesting that we never learn what sect he was from, which I'll get into in a little bit. But what I wanted to talk about was the Kazon hair and its connection to the Afro. So you have to understand that the Kazon coming out of and I'm a little unclear on how long their subjugation from the Trabe were, but it's centuries, centuries easily, maybe even longer. The Kazon during that time were probably, like many cultures, forced to assimilate to Trabe norms and standards of beauty and behavior. And so the Kazon, once they achieved their liberation, it's quite possible that their particular hairstyles are something that emerged after their liberation, an attempt to recapture their traditional methods of wearing their hair in a way that identified them. And if you notice, the different sects have very different variations in how that style is weared. So it's quite possible that if we had viewed the Kazon during their time of subjugation under the Trabe, or better yet, in the modern era, as I talk about in the video, how the Trabe could have been great, that you probably would still have pockets of the Delta Quadrant where the Trabe would still have enclaves where they're still in control, and the local Kazon population is probably brutally oppressed. So when you're looking at the Kazon hairstyle, it's not only a celebration of their liberation and an attempt to reclaim their heritage, possibly a heritage that they may know little about because of the actions of the Trabe. Oppressors often want to destroy the existing culture and replace it with their own. That's consistent throughout human history. But it's also a rejection of the Trabe. It's a rejection of all things Trabe. And so I think it's understandable that, once again, that when they encounter the Federation for the first time, look at it from their point of view. Janeway, a trained explorer and diplomat, based on the words of a total stranger, Neelix, who doesn't appear the most trustworthy in the world, waltzes into their camp without even so much as hailing them, showing up with someone who stole water from them. Bear in mind, this is on a planet where there is and are no natural sources of water, and begins to, and then from their point of view, engages in trickery to rescue Kess, and then wave their superior technology in front of their faces, and then Neelix shoots up the water so they don't even get the payment. So it's no wonder that the Kazon might view these federations as like they would the Trabe. And it's disappointing that nowhere does Janeway, again, supposedly a trained explorer and diplomat, ever consider the similarities. So when you look at the Kazon hairstyle, what you're looking at is a unique and real part of their cultural heritage, but also part of their way and their attempt to erase their period of captivity and bondage by the trade. So ease off the jokes, y'all. I mean, the hair is not that big a deal, and I really wish the show had made that more implicit. I really wish the show had actually even just a line of throwaway dialogue or some sort of flashback scene or perhaps encountering a Kazon who's living under trade subjugation on some trade colony, and their hair is all cut just like the trades. I think it also speaks to getting back to Jal Sankur. I think it's also interesting that my theory on that is that based off the conversation between Cullen and the leader of the Kazon Relora, um, his name escapes me right now, but I know he was played by the same guy who used to be on All My Children. I mean, excuse me, on Young and the Restless. Um, he says that the Nistrim are a poor shadow of where they were in Cullen's grandfather's time, which would have been around the time of the Kazan Revolution. Even more so if you consider that these parts were originally designed for teenage actors, with the idea that the Kazan living violent lives don't live very long. So when you look at it that way, I think, and given the Nistrim's kind of almost manifest destiny arrogance, and Cullen's almost sense of entitlement to power, despite the fact that he rules one of the weakest sects, and the fact that we know that the Nistrim are a sect in decline, leads me to believe that Jal Sankur was actually one of the Nistrim. And that the Nistrim, if you look at their costumes, how their costumes seem to have this kind of mixture of furs, but almost kind of an aristocratic look to them compared to the outfits and clothing of the other Kazon sects. And more than that, they don't just look aristocratic, but they look dingy. They look worn. They look old. So, if Jal Sankur was a leader of the Nistrim, and that sect has fallen on hard times since then, it's possible, from my point of view, that the Nistrim were the house slaves of the trade. They were middle management. They were overseers. They were collaborators. They were the sect that the other Kazon hated because they were the sect that were raised above the others by the trade. But Jal Sankur, a Nistrim, utilized that to his advantage and shared that information with the other leaders of the sects to bring them together to overthrow the trade. And probably was assassinated shortly thereafter because old grudges do die hard. This would also explain why everyone seems to dislike the Nistrim. Like the other Kazon sects, no one has any respect for them. And so so that's where I was with that. But I want to consider the idea that Jal Sankur and the Nistrim perhaps were the former liberators, and that the Kazon and all the other sects as we see them now are merely a degeneration of their past, where they were more like organization, where they would have bear a stronger resemblance to organizations and entities like the Black Panthers and the US organization. Uh, hey, right? Let me know what you think in the comments. I think people should wear their hair how they want. And I liked the Kazon hair. I thought it was cool and distinctive and helped differentiate them from Klingons. And if the writing wasn't going to do it, they sure as hell needed some sort of visual cue to let the audience know. But I'll be getting back next soon with videos on the Securians and, of course, the Great Vidian Conspiracy, which I believe is really the backdoor story of every race that Voyager encounters all the way until they reach the Necrit Expanse. So, hope you're having a good day. Let people have what kind of hair they want, and see you soon.